Okay, I am going to get us started, even though I think there'll still be people drifting in. But we have so much wonderful information to get to you, I don't want to lose a minute. So, you are in Seminar 3, Thinking the Unthinkable, or How to Prepare for a Platform Migration. If this isn't where you want to be, get out.
I want to be here.
But I promise this is where you want to be. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in. I'm going to try to get through the intro stuff in fairly quick order, but if there's anything I miss, let me know. So our goal today is to give you in the room actionable insights into preparing for and managing a migration. We're going to start, the seminar is going to go through the publisher perspective. Then we're going to look at the librarian perspective, and then we're going to have time at the end for questions and open discussion, as well as a interactive exercise for your perspective as well. Just a quick overview of the agenda. There is a break at 9:55. That's a little bit earlier than the official break, but that's where it fit. So it's 15 minutes. If you need to hit the restrooms, you have to go all the way, turn right out of here, turn right again by the check-in desk, and keep walking almost until you would turn right again to get out, and then it's on your left. There will be coffee and snacks somewhere on this floor, probably also way back to where you came in. But I will ask you, we're getting out a little bit earlier than the official break, so maybe you'll have a leap on the bathrooms. And if you could get back here by 10 after so that we can launch into the second part, that would be great. I want to define some terms up front because we have multiple voices speaking here today, so just a note on those. In the context of this seminar, publisher will mean any entity or organization that has content that they need to host online. I don't think we have any librarians here, but if we did and they were using an institutional repository, that would count. Societies, publishers, whatever you are. Librarian is meant to be a broad term inclusive of actual librarians at their institutions, consortia reps, even services who work closely with librarians like subscription agents. Vendor's a tricky one. When the publishers are speaking, we typically are referring to platform vendors or services vendors like our conversion vendors or our composition vendors. A lot of times when librarians say vendors, they may mean those people also, but they also mean publishers. So keep that in mind. And then platform is that thing we put our content on and the thing that their users come and consume that content from. It's a really broad term, so we'll just stick with that and clarify as needed as we go. And then real quick, what we mean by migration. So what we're going to be speaking to specifically today is a scenario of publishers moving from one platform and technology base to an entirely different platform and technology base. Now, that is certainly not what all migrations are. If you are a publisher who acquires an existing journal from another publisher, you really are migrating that journal to your platform, even if it doesn't seem like that. You may be migrating to a different version of your current platform. But just so you know where we're coming from today, this is about the whole shebang. So without further ado, I am going to kick into the publisher perspective part. Before I do that, any questions about facilities or logistics or anything else yet? Everybody on the Wi-Fi that needs to be? I think it's in your programs, also in the app.
2018.
Aries 2018? Okay. Okay. All right, so, give me me up here. We're going to be switching off throughout this. Carrie Kirkpatrick is with the American Physiological Society. She is the digital publications manager there. She has been there for 6 years.
5 years.
5 years.
4.5.
4.5 years.
Lost track.
And prior to that, she spent 10 years in production at MIT Press in production and technology. And then I'm Allison Beelan. I am at Duke University Press, where I'm the Associate Director for Digital Strategy and Systems. And I've been there 14 years. 8 of those years, I was the journal's production manager. And both of us are speaking today because we are the people within our organizations who led the whole process, the creation of the RFP, the selection process, and then served as project leads for migration. And that would be our first key piece of advice. Make one person within your organization the lead and empower that person. Again, to give you a sense of where we're coming from, and so you can match our experiences to yours a little bit better, Duke University Press is a publisher, whereas American Physiological Society is a society that has publications. Duke Press publishes in the humanities and social sciences. American Physiological Society is in the biological sciences. I think that changes our experience migrating. A lot of these most of these platforms were built on STM journal article content. So if that's what your content is, it's going to fit probably pretty nicely into content models and technology. If you're bringing in humanities these days, it's still not quite the easiest fit, and especially if you're bringing in books, is sometimes not quite the easiest fit. And this can vary a little bit from vendor to vendor, platform vendor to vendor. And so we did bring books and journals into a unified platform, and American APS brought all 14 of their journals over.
Yeah, we do have 2 journals that we didn't bring over, but they are on the Wiley platform, so technically they're... Oh, sorry. Okay. So we do have 13 journals that we migrated over to Adapon. We had 2 journals that were on our old platform that we didn't migrate over, but those are hosted by Wiley, so those got migrated as a part of a separate migration project. So what I will talk about today is our experience with the 13 journals that I personally was involved in. So.
Okay. So just a sense of where we're going to go during this segment of the seminar. We're going to cover the planning process, everything you do before you kick into the project, organizing and management of the project, the post-launch period, lessons learned, and then hopefully have a good chunk of time for open discussion and questions at the end. I think I've got about 20 minutes if we stay on track. But we're going to be covering a lot of information in the presentation part that's at a fairly shallow level. If you see something that you want to know more about, don't hesitate to throw your hand up or just ask a question. This is a pretty small room, so I can hear you. Okay, before we go any further, I want to just get a sense of who's in the room. By a show of hands, who is in that category that I defined as publisher? Okay, okay. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Okay. Keep your hands up if you've done a migration in the last 5 years. Okay. So there's some folks who've been through it here. I invite you to share your experiences. Now, please raise your hand if you're in the services and vendor and technology sector. Great. Thank you very much for coming because, one, I think you'll be interested in what both groups have to say, and 2, we want to hear from you whether we've taken away the appropriate lessons learned and what, given your experience on hundreds of migrations, we might all need to know. I will say that the purpose of this is to give you actionable insights. This purpose is not to get into why anyone migrated or why they migrated from where they migrated to where from and to where. This is not about comparisons, so if you're here to get the dirt, there's not going to be any dirt. We're just going to be sharing our experiences. You ready? This does work.
Okay. All right, so we'll just dive right into the planning portion. And planning ahead of time for a project like this is such an important part of the migration project. And the more time you have to plan, the better. And I'd like to outline some of the pre-migration tasks that we performed at APS. Probably the most obvious is to set up your budget so that you have the finances to pull off a project like this. Migrations are expensive, and unexpected costs will creep up throughout the process. We also hired a few staff members to beef up our digital publications department. We realized that when we were conducting an RFP about 5 years ago, that even if we wanted to migrate to a new vendor, we just didn't have the human power in-house to do it. So hiring this extra bodies was really helpful for us. And if you're looking to hire extra staff, some of the qualifications that you might want to look for are the XML expertise, someone who's good with emergency fixes, who doesn't mind receiving a large list of files to fix and resupply, web design experience, someone who can liaise with marketing to help construct a communication plan, and really just having those extra people who can speak web language or digital publications is really helpful. I would also recommend hiring a consultant into your budget if you can. APS had one that helped us through the RFP process, and then we also hired one to help us through the actual migration project as well. It really helps to have that third party who can help keep everyone on task during this huge migration.
Just a quick note in comparison, Duke Press didn't hire a consultant for this process. We had worked with several consultants for a couple of years prior, not really around migration, but around defining our business strategy and our strategy toward our content and our technology and how we wanted to go about digital. So we drew on a lot of what we learned doing that into our search process and didn't really have a consultant on the RFP, and then didn't have one in the project management role helping with the project itself, but that's largely because I was able to be almost completely I was the consultant. I was able to be completely dedicated, and where I sit in my organization, I almost, even before the migration, I almost serve as that neutral party, neither books nor journals, neither editorial nor production. So I was able to serve that role in my particular organization. But if you don't have that neutral voice in there, it can be extremely helpful to have that consultant role.
Yeah, and because APS hadn't performed a migration in over 20 years, and I had only been there for 3 years at the time, and I had not gone through a migration, so the consultant really helped me as well. Kind of go through the motions and make sure we were all staying on track, because we were all kind of flying blind throughout the whole process. So it was nice to have somebody who had done migrations in the past and could really help us with our path. Another project on our plate was to start building an in-house archive of our content. All of our files were housed on our old platform, and we didn't have any backups in-house. And if you have the archive at your disposal, you can also start cleaning up your metadata ahead of time. And if you do dig into your metadata, you will find it's kind of messy. And if you have that in-house archive, you will also be prepared to hand off that content to your new vendor early, which will be helpful in saving time down the road.
If you don't have your content as files on a server that you own, get it now. Don't wait until you think you might be migrating in a couple of years. Get it now. Yeah. I think when we all started in this, and we were also with the same platform for 15 years, we're like, oh, our archive is
There.
There, the site. You can't download that. We had 35,000 articles. You can't download that article by article by
We
article.
had 165,000 articles.
So this is just something that we realized, fortunately, a couple of years beforehand, and we worked with our platform to get all those assets delivered back to us then, and then put an ongoing archiving plan in place so that we always had those assets. If you don't have that, do it now.
Good point. We also conducted a survey asking our users and stakeholders about our current journal site at the time. What did they like? What didn't they like? What features they would like to see us implement in the future. We already had a list of those features that staff had wanted over the years, but this user feedback helped us shape our wish list. When you're looking for that perfect fit in a vendor, you want that vendor who can fulfill your requirements, but also you want someone who can fulfill many of those features that you want to see on your site. The biggest or lengthiest pre-migration project is the request for proposal that has been brought up already, but it's the actual search for the vendor that's the best fit for you. Through this process, you create a document of questions that you want prospective vendors to answer. And those questions are such as questions about their business structure and practices, features they offer and what's on their roadmap, subscription management practices and tools they offer, technology infrastructure, pricing, et cetera, et cetera. So it can get really involved. So what we did was we sent out a separate RFP to our current vendor because we had a completely separate set of questions we wanted them to answer. We then used the completed RFP and recommendations from other publishers to select our finalists. And this is an aspect I'd like to mention that it's super important is if you're a publisher, don't be shy about talking to fellow publishers about their relationship with their vendors. This will help you gather your list of perspectives and also give you further ideas about what to ask in your RFP. The finalists were then invited to APS to give presentations about what they think they would, who they think would be the best fit. All of this information was then used to score each vendor based on a number of different criteria. The end of this process will involve some back and forth and then the final selection, which of course is followed by contract negotiations with the vendor you choose. And there will be a separate slide here to talk about our timeline for that. Okay.
Oh, didn't go well. Sorry, that's not very readable.
But so here is the timeline. We actually took pretty much a full year to complete the RFP. We drafted the RFP from January through July, and then we hired a consultant that could help us kind of finalize that RFP and manage the distribution and organization process. Then July through September was basically distribution, answering questions from those vendors, and then receiving the completed RFPs back. September and October were evaluation and coming up with our short list of vendors. And then October was the presentations from the finalists. October through November was scoring those finalists. And then the selection, and then November through December was basically used for contract negotiations. And then we actually signed our contract in January of last year.
And again, in contrast, at Duke, we went a slightly different route. I call it the no RFP route. That's a little bit of a misnomer, but I mentioned that we had done a couple of years of work really deep diving into what we needed to be doing as a publisher and a press and what our real core business strategy was and what our digital portfolio needed to do to support that. So we had a lot of documentation. I basically contacted the vendors that we knew we wanted to hear from. We went under mutual non-disclosure agreements, and then I used Basecamp to mount all of those documents and to invite them to engage with those documents and then to come and present to us. So without specific questions yet, without specific requirements, a couple of things that did. One, it gave us a sense of how enthusiastic and engaged in how deeply each platform vendor engaged with our material. Two, we were looking for the long haul. We didn't want to do this again in 5 years. So we were not looking for, can you do these 6 specific things that we know right now in 2016 we want to do? We were looking for a methodology that would support us over time, an approach to technology that would support us over time. So for us, it was more important to suss that out first than to suss out specific things that they could or would do with our content. And that might be because we have such a scale of content and it's very diverse. It may be if we were a publisher, a society with a more focused content set, we would be more concerned with, can you do this specific thing we know we need to do? And our process was, on paper, a little bit shorter. But again, it was backed up by this couple of years of pre-work. So in June, I built that document set. July was contacting the vendors and going under NDAs. On-site presentations over August and September. Just talking with finalists and following up with them in October. In November, selecting the preferred vendor, and that's when we really dug into what we did have as lists of requirements. And then contract negotiations in December, bleeding into January. I would much have preferred to have the timeline that Carrie had. We were pressed on our timeline this entire time, so I don't really think we or our vendor got our feet under us in the project until February, and then we launched in on November 20th. That was really tight. So you've got your RFP. You feel really great about it, but what you don't want to do is sign that contract, put out that announcement to all of your customers and your members, if you have members, saying, hey, we've got this great new partnership, stay tuned, only to then hear from them, oh, is your platform going to do this, 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 and this? And you go, oh, no, I didn't even ask. So ask your customers what they care about. You may think you know, and my team, my library relations team, knew a lot, but we had a sense of how important accessibility was becoming at the time. So we had that in there, but if we hadn't, these kinds of things are so foundational that if you don't have them in an RFP and get a commitment from your selected vendor at the RFP stage, you're not going to be able to force it in later. You probably can't afford to pay for it on your own later. And you will be left to, just whenever does this come up on their roadmap. So if librarians especially know what is important and what they need, and you may not know all of it. You may not know what their priorities are. So be sure to ask and get them in your RFP. And I can't remember if you did this, but we set up a library advisory board. So this was about 10 to 12 librarians from different parts of the library who we know are involved in managing access and content. And they were our sounding board. Whenever we had a question about, would it be better if we did this or this? That's who we asked. How should we go about talking about this thing? That's who we asked. When it came time to launch and we needed people to kind of come in and check things, that's who we asked. And really, it was invaluable to have that.
We didn't do that, but we wish we would have done that. So I would definitely emphasize how important, something like a focus group with librarians or advisory board or whatever you want to call it, I would get them involved. We didn't do it enough. We had questions about these things in our RFP, but not in depth, and it didn't go beyond that. So I would definitely get them involved.
Yeah. And also remember, I've got GDPR up here. It's been coming for 2 years, but who among us was really paying attention? I wouldn't have known to say anything about this in the RFP. So that, again, is where it's really good to get a sense of how your chosen partner plans their roadmap and deals with things that pop up like this, because you're not going to be able to predict everything. Okay. So we're actually a couple of minutes ahead before we get into the project organization. So I just want to open the floor for any questions or comments or observations from your own experiences around planning. Yes. Could you tell us who you are? Glenn, I'm sorry, this is being recorded. So Glenn Landis with ASH, yes.
Yes, can you just speak more about the practicals about the library board? Do you meet often? Do you have conferences?
That's actually going to be for me. Yes, so let me introduce a little ahead of schedule. Kristen Twardowski, she is my colleague at Duke Press, and she works on our library relations and sales team.
And the question for those of you watching via WebEx or at home was, what were the logistics of our library advisory board? How often did we meet? What did that look like, et cetera? So our library advisory board, like Allison mentioned, was 10 to 15 or so librarians from varying institutions. These would be small colleges. We tried to have, a community college as well as a large research institution, and a few international as well as U.S.-based institutions as well, to get a good variety of experiences. We never met in person except for small groups at various conferences, but we did have very frequent email communications. We tried to loop those into every 2 weeks. We would send a question to the large group and give them a few days to answer. They could all see each other's feedback, and they would respond to each other's comments as well. These questions could be, as small as, what do you guys think of as accessibility, or in terms of what do we need to do for accessibility? Or it could be really detailed things about metadata, what kinds of back-end programs and ILS systems they used, et cetera. So that communication was pretty regular, I would say May through September. So this is when we were still in the planning phases, really, of our platform migration. Building phases of the platform migration. But as we got closer and closer to launch, we tried to loop them more into testing. Like Allison said, we launched on November 20th, and preparing for that, we asked our librarians, I know this is around Thanksgiving, can you guys respond if we check this link, see if you have access, here are these different types of content, we want to see what that looks like on your end. And they were very kind enough to send screenshots and things like that. Mm-hmm. And we've been following up with them after migration as well, though it's been less frequent since things have settled down the past couple of months.
Yes. Rose from Elsevier, thank you.
So I was wondering if you also had a similar group of end users to test the usability of the platform,
So the question is, did we have a similar advisory group with end users? And I'll answer first and briefly and then turn to Carrie. So we have a few society journals, but not many that are members. So that doesn't mean we can't do usability testing, but we didn't have a baked-in population. We did not do that specifically for this platform build. What we had done, some of the activities we had done in those previous couple of years of planning had been usability studies, developing personas, doing some focus groups and interviews, and we took all that into our planning. But we also, for economics' sake, took the basic interface of our platform partner and said, we're going to take that pretty much wholesale as you have it built. We knew what other publishers were using it. We trusted those publishers. And I'm not saying this is the way to go, but I think one thing to recognize at this point in the evolution of digital publishing and platform building, unless you are literally building your own, you have your own designers and your own developers, as long as you're working with one of these platforms, a lot of this UX stuff is just settled. And unless you have a big budget to customize what they've got, you're going to take to a large degree what they have figured out and done through their usability testing. Does that mean it's perfect? No. But we knew we couldn't afford to to change some of those user flows. And where we did have specifics, we took that into the design planning process with them.
Yeah, and this is jumping a little bit ahead. It's not part of the planning, but we did not involve like outside end users in the testing. Our platform allowed us to sort of imitate users, so we became too reliant on that function to be able to test outside users using that function. And you're just so harried at that point in the process that organizing this big end user testing phase, it's just, it would take a lot of effort. And so, and at the end of this project, you're just so pressed for time. And a lot of times that testing time is eliminated because you're trying to hit launch. So,
yeah, I mean,
unfortunately.
I think the truth is that, well, there's two parts. There's like, did you do your usability testing to inform what you want to build? So we did. Then there is, okay, you've got your beta site, you're not yet launched and live yet. Are you bringing people in to test? The truth is we ran out of time, and I'm not saying we don't have time. We could have given ourselves more time, but we didn't. We had a contracted date by which we had to get off the old platform and have the new platform in use, and we just flat out didn't have the time. Two, everything's done by then. By the time somebody can come in and have a halfway coherent user experience, you can't go back and undo it. Maybe you write down some things and you put that on your own roadmap and budget for it for the next year after you launch, but you aren't gonna 1 or 2 months before you launch go in and be like, I really don't like the layout of articles. It didn't work for people. Let's rip that up and build it again.
There were no prototypes in advance.
No. Well, there were, so yeah, you're right. So to a large degree, we kind of looked at the sites that were live. Several of the platforms now have sort of brand new versions of their core interface. So it can actually be a little bit challenging to find a live example of these, especially one that you think fits your publishing organization. I mean, over time, more and more publishers will adopt these newer interfaces, and you'll have that. So yeah, we did have that. And did we put it in front of people? No. I wish we could have. Yes.
Michael Dar from the ACS.
ACS. Thank you.
I had the experience. It wasn't for a migration, but I did some focus group testing for a taxonomy.
Mm-hmm.
You basically can add 2 to 3 months to your timeline. It was way longer than I thought it was going to take. Because part of it is just recruiting people to do it. No one wants to do it for free typically. Then you got to do incentives to get them to do it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, and and it's not our core business. It's not even, I'm in charge of this, and it's not even really my core business. It should be, but it's not. So I'm going to move on now, but these are all great points and questions. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about project organization, and this is going to be a little bit of here's how we did it, here's some tips. First of all, these are big projects, and they are not a singular project. And so we absolutely had to break it down into smaller components. We broke it down into these 4 components. We had the site build and design, content migration, data migration, and partner communications. I wish we had had a 5th sub-project dedicated to content workflows. And those would be the people who, after we had figured out 1 and 2, like how the content needed to be tagged and produced, what the final spec was, and how it all fit into the site, we needed a team that could document all that and begin to work with our composition and data vendors to get those new workflows into place ahead of launch, and we didn't. So again, I strongly advocate for placing a project lead and putting them in place. I was dedicated about 80%. My actual role allows my organization to do that with me, so that was great. Carrie, can you speak to how you all?
Yeah, very similar. My role was pretty much about 90%, I would say, because I was all of these things, and then I had, a couple of people who were core members of the team, and then committees kind of within committees. So I did have help, but I was that project lead, and it took about 90% of my time, if not more.
Yeah. And so my core team consisted of people from across the organization, customer service, library relations and sales, marketing, journals marketing and book marketing, and editing, design, and production. So there were team leads on each of these. On these, sometimes there were co-leads. So for site design and build, we had our book marketing and our journal marketing managers as co-leads. And then they pulled in resources and formed their own teams. I, as project lead, dealt with the team leads. And that worked pretty effectively for us. They dealt with their departments and their teams. I think, what's key with the team leads, and if you are picking a core team, you need people on there who understand the business, who are comfortable making fast decisions, and who are trusted to make those decisions within their group. This is not something that will work by consensus, where every time you have a question that needs to be decided, you take 2 weeks to poll the whole group and to hash out the responses and to come to a conclusion. Then there's this whole other team you need to organize and manage, and that's your vendor team, and there are a lot of them. If you're moving from one platform to another, you're almost certainly going through some kind of content conversion process, from whatever the previous platform spec had been to a new target spec. Some of the platform vendors offered to do this or manage this as a service. We got a third-party service, so we ended up working in this very tight triangle for content migration between our content conversion vendor, our platform vendor, and us. That was tricky because when things go off schedule or cost more money, you, the publisher, are really left holding the bag, because you're not going to win in an argument between the two vendors about whose fault ultimately it was. But for us, it did work pretty well. With your new platform partner, you need to come to understand what their team roles are, what their project methodology is, how the project and the team is going to be governed, what escalation paths do you have, when something's not going right, who do you talk to, what are your ways of staying in regular communication about that. Don't forget your retiring platform vendor. It's really imperative that you be clear with them about your timelines, to the degree that you know them. You've got to understand your obligations to each other, notification periods, contract end dates. You might have to talk with them about some contingency planning if you aren't able to launch your project before the contract end date. Do that when you're signing your contract with a vendor. Talk about what that exit looks like a lot more than vendor will hand you your assets. And beware that they're not working for free. Just because they've been your partner for years doesn't mean they're going to put out hours of labor. You're going to pay if you need to get assets back from them, if you need to get data delivered from them. So you've got to budget for that also. But it's really important to be open and clear with your retiring platform vendor. And then you also have your composition and your data vendors who, one of them may be your conversion vendor for the migration, but may not be. All of them eventually have to get up to speed on what it is going to look like to deliver content tagged properly to that new platform, and manage all that with you. And again, this is a place where I wish we had done better. This is one of my big lessons learned. So scheduling. This is going to get I'll try to keep it from getting geeky. This is close to my heart. I do not have a Gantt chart, so count yourselves lucky. Okay. So if I boiled down the scheduling method, it would be know your launch date. There are several steps to that. I guess know when you have to be off your current platform and make sure your launch date is in a good position on the calendar with relation to that. Go ahead and back your launch date up. Know what date you actually have to be up by, and then back your launch date up. Back it up a month. Back it up as far as you can back it up. Then you need, I talked about all the different project subparts. You need to find the least flexible process within that. I think most of the time, I haven't been through a ton of migrations, but I think most of the time that least flexible process is going to be the site build and the migration, everything that goes into the technology of building the site. So if that's the case, set your schedule based on that. Then all those other efforts, data cleanup, content, especially content conversion, need to align to that schedule. And that means you are telling your organization, your other vendors, hello, here's this time box. I know it may not be enough time to do this, but that's how much time we have. And then everybody needs to understand what that means. You as a publisher can't set a time box that on some level you may know is not adequate to get all of your content perfect and expect it to be perfect. You're going to have some sense of where you're going to make compromises. On the content side, it may be that you just kind of have to give up and gloss over on some of those metadata inconsistencies. Or on the site building side, which features you can launch without if you have to. So, you start off with a schedule and you think, how complicated could it be? There's the calendar, there's your launch date. Sure. But then remember, you've got these multiple projects. You've got a site build. You've got a data migration project. And data migration, let's be clear, this is who are your customers? What are your products? Of your products and your customers, who has what? And then what are the rules around all of that? You may also have data migration related to usage data, either your publisher usage data or your counter usage data. I will say we totally punted on migrating counter data. Very soon after we announced that we were going to be migrating in a year, we let our customers know that we were not migrating counter data, and that they should take all actions necessary to download and build whatever kind of archive they wanted to have. Part of that was because our previous platform allowed for overlapping IP ranges, as did our practices with our backend system. So we ended up with a lot of different accounts that really represented maybe the same institution. And counter usage was associated with each of those accounts. Well, with the new platform, we couldn't have overlapping IPs. So part of our data migration project was doing this huge deduplication and consolidation process with our customer database. And that was going to mean that we could not do a one-to-one transfer of, customer A's counter data over to customer one's counter data here, because they were going to be different accounts. I don't know if that made any sense, but know if you have to dedupe your customer data. And then you have the content migration. So you kind of instinctually know that all of these need to come to fruition at the same moment, but that is too simplistic. Quick preview. Another calendar that you may not be aware of. A lot of the platform vendors these days are working on some version of an agile methodology, and that means that they work in sprints. Some have 2-week sprints, some have 3-week sprints. I know ours, the whole company operated on the same sprint schedule, so those sprints were not for our project. So you need to be aware of that, how that works, and what that means for when you will see the outputs of each sprint, and when you can review it and how much time you have to get feedback to them. And it also matters because if you know you've got a milestone related to one of these projects and the only way to sort of see it is on the site, you have to know when the site's going to be ready for that. So the whole point of this is just that this is complicated and you need to get it down pat as soon as you can. So again, I needed to get a visualization out there for the team. So I started with the least flexible process, and that was the site schedule. You can see I represented the sprints in there, as well as roughly each period where we would have a chance to review what had just gotten released and to give feedback. So this is not the tool I use to manage the schedule as the project manager. It's the tool I use to communicate to the team and their teams when they were going to be on deck to do what. And I aligned everything to the launch. Then I layered in the points of intersection with the other major projects. One major project being the content load, the converted content load, and the ready for data load. So these are the points where the site was going to be ready to import all of that content that had been converted on that parallel content project. So that was the other timeline I had for the content team, is what was going on in that full-fledged gigantic project to convert 2,500 books and 35,000 articles, and where did these two things need to intersect and align. So I think it's really important when you have these sub-projects with team leads that everybody is working off of one map. Even if they're not getting absolutely every piece of information they need out of it, it's good. You have to have this touchstone. And then finally, this isn't really sort of about project planning and organization. No matter how much you planned your RFP, you are going to hit some hidden shoals. And I found two rough categories of these. There are things that your old platform just handled out of the box. Maybe it got figured out 15 years ago. Nobody ever wrote it down. Nobody is around anymore to tell you why they made that decision. You don't even know it's happening. So those are your black boxes. Shibboleth was one of these for ours, just something that got taken care of. Well, suddenly we're being asked, do you have a relationship with the Shibboleth Federation? Are you a member? I don't know. I had no idea.
That happened to us too.
Did I even think to ask? No, I had a vague requirement about, can handle Shibboleth authentication. Abuse monitoring configuration, black box. Was asked, how do you want us to configure this? What level of use should trip somebody being kicked off the system? I don't know. How many clicks are legitimate clicks? Just there's a lot of stuff that once you are in a stable state on a platform just works for you and you're going to lose sight of them. So when you're migrating, all of that stuff comes up. Then there are the things that you know some stuff about, but probably not as much as you should. I think the most complex set of choices you're going to have to make here are around the identity and access integration approaches. I think some platforms basically say, here's how you do it, get all your data in shape. Other platforms are open on that and work with different levels of integration with your own backend system. So just even knowing how to assess the pros and cons of different approaches, we didn't know enough to even know what the consequences of our choices were. You may be aware that your data is not in the greatest shape, but you may not be. And then there's the deep, deep business rules, the things that, you ask your product people, your library relations and sales people, your subscription product people, how do these products work? And they can tell you in a sort of absolutely accurate anecdotal way, but not in a way that your vendor can build logical access routines to. There's also, again, 15 years on the same platform. We had lost institutional knowledge. There were all kinds of metadata surprises. We found about 6,000 articles that had DOIs on them that had never been deposited and registered to CrossRef. Carrie, I think you found.
We had that. We also had, 6,000 PubMed records that didn't link back to our content for various reasons. So, I mean, these are the surprises that pop up. And also another sort of broad piece of advice about this is talk to us. Like, talk to people who have gone through this before, so you get this advice about these black boxes. That's the best way to get advice on how to do these things. So.
Yeah, I almost wish, maybe we can do this. I'd like to build a Google spreadsheet of all the different black boxes we've all encountered and the surprises along the way that, just grows over time. And maybe one day we'll cover the whole spectrum, but I doubt it. Okay, we have just a couple minutes. Any questions on that material?
Crystal clear.
Yeah. So I'm particularly interested from people who are with the platforms or the content conversion vendors that are in here, or even CrossRef. Any hints or tips? Yes.
And hold on, let me bring a mic to you.
Hi there, so I'm Amanda, I'm from CrossRef. So yeah, agree with so much of what you've been saying earlier, particularly about planning in advance, and the surprises of what you think you're registering with CrossRef compared to what you're actually registering with us. So one of the big things we've heard from our members is to do an audit up front of what you're registering with us, because it might be a bit of a surprise. So
I didn't even know we could do that.
Yeah, exactly. Or we thought we were registering this type of content, references or abstracts or ORCIDs or whatever it might be, and actually they haven't been registered by your current vendor when you thought they were being. So to start with, probably the best thing to do is just to get an audit up front as early as possible. And I know members we've spoken to who've done this recently have said they really, really didn't want to do it with everything else that was going on. But further down the line, they discovered at the implementation stage they had to do one anyway, and they really wish they'd done it up front. So definitely start with that to begin with. We've got a new tool that's in beta at the moment, it's not yet live, called participation reports, which can show you what you are and aren't registering against 10 key data points. As I said, not yet live, but if anybody wants a sneak peek, we've got it at our stand downstairs for the conference, if anybody wants a little bit of a sneak peek. Plus, we've got, we're about to put on the site a checklist of things you might want to put in your RFP. So again, a lot of members have said they put in a line in their RFP around works with CrossRef or registers content or what have you, and obviously all the vendors will tick that box, but obviously there's a very big difference between just registering DOIs with very basic metadata and actually registering full, rich metadata to make sure you're as discoverable as possible, taking part in all of our services, etc., etc. So we've got this new checklist which will be coming in the next couple of days that you can just cut and paste so you can ask those kind of specific questions. And the final thing to say is that just finally your single project lead, yes please, and particularly working with us, that would be really helpful.
All right, so when you leave and get back to your organizations after this week and you start collecting your content archive, then immediately audit it. Then you're set.
No, okay. I think I saw blue hand up first.
Hi, Jacob with Adapon. I'll be quick. Just want to say one additional item to add to the list that you just said. When you make that content archive in advance, which not all publishers do, and I wish they all did because it's so much faster if you do that. There's another thing to check for, which is every article that you've had in past years or book chapter where something wasn't rendering quite right and you called up the vendor and said, could you fix how that's rendering? You need to check, did they actually fix it in the underlying XML or did they kind of fudge it in the HTML? Because if they did only in the HTML, that's not necessarily going to convert over. You might have to, what I unofficially call relive your sins as you convert
Yeah.
over. What do you?
That is exactly what this is about. It's anything that you fudged in the display layer goes away. And again, if you've been on the same platform for a long time, there have been different best practices over the generations of online publishing. And what we found is that with our new platform, so much is driven out of the XML. And if it's not in the XML, and if it's not there to drive that, what you want to happen on the display side, there's no like magic tool that they've got that's going to make it happen. This is especially true around subject collections, categories, anything that, you know, you're like, I want someone to be able to do this that's outside of the straight journal article flow. You may have done it in through an outside database, a relational database. You may not know that, but that may be how you did it. It's not represented in your content. So, Bernie, go ahead.
Another point I'll make as well is, when you find those problems with XML that aren't rendering on the new site, don't be afraid to ask for a report, because a lot of times the vendor can run a script, and so you can get the full report of exactly how many instances of this problem there are. A lot of that might be a surprise. There may be thousands. There may be only 2, but definitely ask for those reports and have them run scripts to give you the full shebang about that.
Yeah, we did that a huge number of times with both our data conversion vendor, our content conversion vendor, and our platform. Bernie.
Bernie Stukenborg with Sheridan and Sheridan Pub Factory. Not anything about the technical, but about this process. I just want to say a few things. The way Allison did the non-RFP is the best RFP. You shared those business documents with me also, Allison. What that did was it gave the service provider the opportunity to look into the business, their strategic objectives that were, that Duke was after. That's what this is about. If you got 64 questions for your service provider, and they're real questions, ask them. But the standard 64 questions that maybe you're never going to read those responses, don't worry about those things. If you have the right collaboration, this can be better. And Duke ended up with a beautiful site, okay?
Thank you.
And through this process, the whole thing, because of this kind of collaboration, this thing works. This is a lot of work, and you guys are doing a great job of explaining that. So for everybody in the room who's kind of considering these things, this is just a great example and a great approach. Mm-hmm. Your service provider should partner with you and make this process better. It should make your life so much better if you are collaborating in the right way. So nice work on all that.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on, and again, we have more time at the end. I'm going to hand the main mic back over to Carrie. I'm going to grab this, and you can
Okay, that way, sure. All right, so post-launch. So we had a countdown clock to launch day in-house. We were ready to party. We had started to schedule vacations that we had put off for the last year. But what you'll learn is your work is far from over. After your site,
They literally had a countdown clock.
did.
Carrie sent me did a screen share with me at one point that showed on her desktop screen the countdown.
But after your site goes live, the first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, is test it, and test it more and more and more. You'll always want to catch those things before your customers do. And what we did was essentially reperform the beta testing that we had done pre-launch right up front to try to catch those glitches that before the customers did. There will also be some levels of training you want to conduct. Make sure I had the slide open. as there might have been enough lag time between initial training and launch that kind of learn by doing in the live environment will require more help. Be prepared to do as much training as needed to get the staff comfortable using those new tools and interfaces. And provide documentation for your staff, and this is one of the areas which our current vendor is really strong, so that's a really great thing to have. We also have procedures for each department on our internal wiki as a staff resource that they can refer back to about how to use the new tools. You also want to verify that all integrations and deposits are working properly, so that's PubMed, CrossRef, Discovery Services, etc. Your vendor will tell you that they're working, but you will actually want to talk to the vendors and visit their sites to get reassurance for yourself that they are working. And then an example of that is what I was referring to earlier about PubMed, not linking 6,000 of our articles, which we found by visiting their site. Let's see. After you go live, this is the first opportunity that you and your compositor have to submit and publish new content to the new platform. Make sure your staff are QAing that content very closely to make sure the content is presenting as it should and that all necessary metadata are displaying properly. This is a learning process for your compositor as well, so giving them feedback in these early stages is really important.
And I would add here, get your stakeholders' expectations leveled around the content publication process in that first period after post-launch. So if you're a society and you have close relationships with your editors, get them clued in. For me, it was making our journal editorial manager understand this so that he could explain it to our journal editors. It's rough. There's only so much you're going to figure out through the process that you've gone through. It's only when real content is hitting the site in real time that truly strange things start to pop up. Mm-hmm. And it takes time to figure out. It's all new to everybody. It takes time to figure out, is this a gap in the platform? Is it a gap in the content model? Is it mistagging? And getting it fixed. And we've had some journal editors who very reasonably don't understand why suddenly it's taking longer to get things and they don't look quite as right as they used to.
Yeah, and a lot of our editorial team in-house has been working at APS forever, and so they weren't used to this change either. And the first time somebody saw our new site, they were like, I can't find anything. They completely freaked out. So they're, depending on what staff you have in-house, there may be a lot of hand-holding throughout the process. Change is hard for people. So, all that training is really going to pay off. More training, better. You also have accumulated, for post-launch, a to-do list. So those things are fixes that you just didn't have time for pre-launch and weren't super important that you needed them for launch, but they will build up over time, and so you will use a lot of that post-launch time kind of catching up those things, and you will have a lot of those things to do. Watch your traffic and analyze your usage stats after you launch. This can be an indication of some problem spots, and so if you're analyzing that traffic very closely, you can catch some things.
And also, well, this is your next point about re-engaging users.
Oh, yeah. For example, we were watching Google Analytics very closely, and that in turn turned into discussions with Google and Google Scholar as to how we could boost our traffic. So at launch, you won't necessarily see a spike in your traffic that you think you might see or want to see. So that was another one of our sort of learning points. And speaking of usage, there are certain pockets of users that you might have been disconnected from at launch for a variety of reasons. They didn't update their bookmarks, they aren't signed up for your new alerts, and re-engaging with them through various communication channels is really important. There are a number of ways to do this, but having a solid communication plan in place during the migration and post-launch is really important for driving this smooth and timely fashion.
Yeah, it was not technically possible for us to migrate our email alert subscribers. So we lost 15 years worth of email alert subscribers. And so a big post-launch effort for us was getting the word out in any way we could, trying to drive them to the new site to sign up again. So these are people that we don't have a business relationship with other than that, and that relationship is managed through the platform, not in our back-end business system. So that was a big effort.
How many did you lose a lot of subscribers that way?
Well, we lost
Yeah.
all of our email alert.
You get back?
I haven't checked lately. Probably nowhere near as many, because I'm telling you, they've been signing up for 15 years and just ignore them or send them into junk
A lot
mail.
of those email addresses were bad anyway
Yeah.
because they had signed up like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Can you explain why did you not export the email addresses, or
So,
what caused that?
that's a good question, and I will try to dredge it up. Okay. We had email addresses, and we had what alerts they were signed up to. But we couldn't sign them up automatically on the new system.
Like from a technical reason, or from
We couldn't establish they needed to have a user account to have an alert on the new platform, and we couldn't establish user accounts for them.
Yeah, our old system, we were on the same system before, and that old system is people didn't have to sign up for an account to get alerts. That all they had to do was put in their email address. So
Which is
that's all we
great.
had on them.
That drives tons of alert signups. But yeah.
Okay. You will also start to develop a list of site improvements you will want to make based on user feedback. Perhaps something wasn't working exactly the way you thought it would, or you have ideas on how to make a certain feature even better. You'll want to prioritize those, fixes you can make sooner or later, or things you should put on your roadmap for future development. And finally, something we did at APS, not only to put more clarity on how the project went overall, but it also helped us in having an understanding of how we could work better together internally, is we held a post-mortem on how the project went. We met with all of the teams to obtain feedback and lessons learned, and this is kind of how I was able to prepare this talk. We have a lot of large projects coming up in the future, so being able to understand how we could work better together and make better use of our time and work together on deadlines and things like that was really helpful for us moving forward.
Yeah. And then finally, post-launch, supporting and communicating with customers. And that sounds kind of warm and fuzzy, but what this meant in reality for us was being extremely proactive, or as proactive as we knew how to be, emailing our institutional subscriber admins and saying, we know this is wrong. It's okay. We know it. We're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working really hard. We'll let you know when there's new news. So what we found out, that was very much appreciated, that there's a certain level of understanding that not everything is going to go smoothly. And so if that is the case, then our partners just wanted to hear from us and know that we were, one, aware of it so that they didn't feel like they had to report it and report it again and again and again. And two, that sense that it was being worked on.
And Duke also had a really good communication plan in general. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but it seemed like you were really in touch with your, especially institutions, throughout the whole process, and that really helped in communicating with them and telling them at the end, hey, we've been in touch with you this entire time, and now that we've finally launched, this is what's going on. So I signed up for their alerts, so I knew what was going on.
That's all Kristen and her colleagues. So, okay.
All right, so moving on.
All right. So so finally we're at lessons learned, and we're going to try to be brief about this because I want us to get into the conversation portion.
And we've brought a lot of these up already,
up.
So, as we mentioned before, there's no such thing as starting too soon. The more planning you do, the better.
Know your blind spots. These are those black boxes or those things that you may think you know but you don't know enough about. Just question everything. You have no idea getting the on-site presentations is great because if you really have been with one platform for a long time, that's your opportunity to see how different the world can be. And it was mind-blowing. And even that didn't shine a light on all of our blind spots. So run an in-house exercise to say, what could we just be taking fundamentally for granted that needs to be said?
And stick to your deadlines at every stage, or testing will suffer. A lot of times, if you're not meeting your deadlines, things get taken away towards the end of the process, and that really cuts into your testing time, and you really need that time to test. So that's why it's so important to keep those deadlines early on, because it will bite you later if you don't.
Give into the time box.
Start early on any custom integrations, so anything out of the box. One example of this is APS integrated with our membership management system. And so we actually started work on that earlier than planned, and that really helped us in the end because we needed that extra time to get this custom integration set up. So that's just one example. But anything custom, get it early in the schedule.
Do a deep dive on all of that intersection of customer, product, and data. And not only on the data, like, okay, how are the rules and how is the data getting passed back and forth, but also on the interfaces. I think one thing we just ran out of time in our project to do was really understand what the librarian's admin interface on the site was going to look like to them. I mean, we'd had pictures of the system, but not what our data was going to look like in the system. And we've been scrambling around that in particular. I wish, in retrospect, that we had said that we had done this much earlier and in much greater detail and not just been like, I'm sure it'll be fine. This has happened for different customers again and again. No big deal. It was a big deal.
Expect your back content to be a mess. And it will be. You think that your metadata is perfect and crystal clear, and it won't be. For example, we discovered that there are 3 years of our content for one journal for a couple journals that was actually duplicated content for each journal. And we're like, why was this the way it is? And it turns out that was another journal at one time with a different title and a different ISSN. So we had to plan for that. Like, what do we do with this? We also had missing content. So we actually were running to the National Library of Medicine to scan print content that we're just missing from our site. So those types of things are going to crop up in a project like this.
That's a good segue to being ready for content fixes and consequences. So you've got to be ready to act. You've got to be ready to get down to the NLM and fire up that scanner. You've got to be, even if that wasn't what you planned to do with your day, you've got to be ready to find out that there is this huge inconsistency or gap, and then how are you going to address it? And you've got a couple of options. Are you going to work with your content conversion vendor to find sort of a blanket programmatic fix? If you are, that's going to break some things. It may fix 80% of your problem and leave 20% untouched and break 10% of something else. And it may still be the right thing to do. You just have to know the risks you're taking when you make these. Are you going to dive into each individual XML file and fix it by hand? Are you going to pay someone to do that? How much time do you have? You've got to be ready to make these kinds of calls kind of on the fly. Oop. No, go ahead.
Okay. Involve librarians in the process, and we've talked a lot about this, and you will be hearing from the librarians later in this session. But it's just so important to involve them in the process. RFP, testing. They're your customers if you're a society publisher. So you definitely want to make sure that your platform is to their spec as well. So. Yeah, Google makes the rules, so listen to them.
And they don't make the rules crystal clear.
Exactly, and this goes beyond, you'll hear that your abstract needs to be above the fold, but it really goes beyond that. There are rules that you may not even be aware of that you have to follow, and so you just have to make sure that your site, upholds those rules and make sure that your site is the most crawler-friendly as possible. And I'll shout out a name here. Darcy Dapra at Google Scholar is a really great resource for this. So she's helped us a lot through this process.
Yeah, and I mean, I think because we're larger, we were definitely on their radar. But if you're not, and Darcy reached out to say, hey, I hear you're migrating, let's start talking. If you're not, Darcy's ready to take that call any day.
She's great. She's fantastic. All right, be prepared for traffic changes. As I had talked about earlier, you will want to see that spike in your traffic right away, but that won't necessarily happen. And each vendor counts its downloads differently, so you can't necessarily gauge your new traffic against your old in a really meaningful way. So, yeah, I don't know if you had that same experience.
Well, we didn't even try to compare traffic because we knew we were losing so many email subscribers, and we didn't know what that was going to represent and the differences. So we just concentrated on doing all we could to drive traffic once it was up. And I think we'll benchmark coming up soon. And then finally, provide strong leadership on this project, empower that leadership. Make sure that leadership is willing to be the bad guy or gal. I think Carrie and I both talked about how at different times we were not well liked. That was okay.
I was ready for vacation just because of that. And, you know, you're sending out a ton of emails to your team as well, and, you know, they probably get so sick of hearing from you, but, you know, they need to hear from you, and you need to let them know that your emails are important, and so pay attention.
And if you don't have a strong leader who's trusted, the team is going to freak out. If they don't feel like somebody's got this in hand, it is extremely chaotic when you are in the midst of it. And if you don't have someone that you're like, you know what, it's chaotic, but I trust that that leader is got it under control or is going to tell me when I need to do something, then again, even if you're annoying them, they feel better. Okay, so that is the overview, and I'm going to go back to lessons learned for this, but I just wanted to make sure that you get our email addresses. I'm also in the Whova app if you want to find me for any follow-up questions that you may have. But we've got 10 minutes for just questions and comments. Rob, go ahead. Hold that thought.
Oh, sorry.
Gotta get the recording, people.
Rob O'Donnell, Rockefeller University Press. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process you guys used to discover missing content in the first place.
That was mainly because our new vendor sent us a script of things that were missing. And so we had a whole spreadsheet to go by that our vendors could hand us and say, you know, this content isn't there. Do you have it? Can you give it to us? So that's basically how we found it.
We didn't have that, and I wish we did. I was just so naive. I was like, why would we be missing content? And we were missing content at every levels. You know, we launched and we got reports of like, this whole issue's not there, or the PDF of this article's not there, or the supplemental. It was like at every level. So go ahead, you had more to say.
No, so I understand pieces missing, but the list that, Carrie, that you just described, where did the master list come from?
So they just were able to determine by, you know, our volume and issues and how, you know, those sequences ran throughout our content. You know, this looks like a gap. Is this a gap, or was this how things were numbered in that particular year? So they were able to go by, you know, patterns, and I think that was pretty much the way they did it.
Because we had that in-house archive, I was able, by hook or by crook, it's not fancy, it was just a file. It was actually in SharePoint. I was able to download a lot of the metadata that we had built around the files, around the assets, and sort of extract out of that for each journal, from the first volume to the last volume, following the logical sequence of numbering. I was able to extract out of that every issue. My visibility stopped at that level.
And just to build off of what Allison said really quickly, from once we got deeper than issue, then we really did rely on librarians saying, we can't find this.
And
It's-
discovery services who get really grumpy when something that they once had in their database no longer resolves.
Were those files missing from the original platform, or did they disappear as part of the migration?
It was mostly that they were just missing throughout our history, that they were never on the platform. I can't think of any instances where they just got lost in the shuffle during migration. Maybe a few of them, but mostly it was missing from the start.
So would it be possible to run a script or something before the migration to discover those?
If you could in-house, yeah. Or maybe your current host can do that for you, but I would certainly try, because
Yeah.
if you can just determine those gaps early, that would be super helpful, because we were scrambling.
And this goes back to building your archive now
Yeah.
before you need to migrate, and then you have time to go through it all. It may take a year to get down to the article level, but if you do that now, you have time.
Yeah, it can help if you have your content repository in-house, such that your platform is not your repository, they're just the host. So that way you have all the knowledge of what files you should have rather than the platform.
Yeah. And our content dated back to 1898, and so it's understandable that we may miss some things, like this issue from 1912 is missing. Do you have it? It's hard to discover those things
And
if you don't have a script.
And I'm going to get up on one of my long-standing standing hobby horses here, and Bernie is going to laugh. So if you do book publishing at any level and you need to send ebooks out into the world, there is this service well established with multiple vendors in the marketplace called digital asset distribution. Like Ingram Core Source in the university press community. There's BiblioVault. I think Code Mantra does this. I'm sure there are others now. But basically, you get all of your ebook and print digital assets for your books into one place, so that when you need to do a short-run digital print, you can send those files to a printer. You can send your ebook files to Amazon and Sony and whoever else. This does not exist for journal publishing. And I have been talking to everyone who could possibly enter this space about doing it, and it still doesn't exist. So it is up to you to build this content archive in-house. And since we do have books and I do use these systems, what we have for our in-house archive is woefully inadequate to doing the kinds of things we're talking about. If you have a true CMS in-house, bully for you, you'll be in a good position, but we don't. So please, someone build a digital asset management system for journals.
Craig Griffin from Silverchair. So you knew I was going to say something, right? So one thing I think that was really successful, Allison, was that in all of the many months of conversations that we had leading up to signing a contract, you were able to explain a lot of detail in certain areas where you had a sense of these are things that maybe editorially we do a little bit differently, or some little wrinkles and nuances, and able to really explain that, so that early on, even before we even signed a contract, we knew what those things were, and we knew those places where we had to pay extra attention. The content was going to come in structured a certain way, or associations of that nature. So that was extremely helpful. And having that sort of understanding of what makes Duke different or APS different in certain content areas is really helpful to explain to a vendor, because then they can keep that in mind throughout the process as well. And then the other thing I would say, just in terms of blind spots, is getting into the contracting process can always be really fun. At the end, everyone sort of made the decision to move forward, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of new people on the phone. There's legal, sometimes there's additional executives, there's sometimes additional departments, depending on the size of your organization, and contracting can take quite a bit of time.
Craig, are you scarred?
No. I did think we were having Christmas dinner together.
Yeah, I know. Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, Craig and I were. Yeah, Duke Legal was no fun. No, I'm sorry, not Duke Legal. Duke OIT Security, Duke E-commerce Division, Duke Legal, Corporate Risk, Procurement. It was bad. If you are a small society that is self-governed, God bless you.
Yeah, it varies widely, but generally the larger the organization, the more new voices on the phone as you get closer to signing something. And so that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And to echo what Craig said first, know where you're different. So even if you're an STM publisher and you're like, hey, everybody's been doing this for 25 years, you're different somewhere. And it matters a whole lot to you and your editors and your authors and your members. So know where you're different and make sure to highlight that in those conversations.
And a lot of those know where you're different things are also custom integrations. So those are the things you need to start on very early in the process.
Yeah.
One of the things, how we're different from, and it was kind of surprising that we're different in this way, but when we moved to a new platform, we wanted our ahead of print content archived. It's citable information. We didn't want it to go away. So that was one of the pieces that we wanted to migrate. Well, on our current platform, the way it usually works is when ahead of print content gets final published, it just goes away. And so we didn't want ours to go away. So they had to build a complete custom system as to how to get that ahead of print content archived once it's published. And that was a bear. That was a complete bear, and we weren't really prepared for how long it would take to get that set up. But it was one of the things we started early, and we were glad we did, because that was a huge project in itself.
Okay, so we're at break time, and we have time at the end of everything for more discussion, and I think it's going to be really interesting to hear how that discussion goes once we have the librarian's perspective out there. So go forth, find your coffee. Please be back at 10 after. We will start promptly.
All right, thanks guys. I think we're going to get back started with our second half of the presentation. So now that we've talked a little bit about what things look like, the publishers like, all of the work that goes into a platform migration on that end, that's all fine and dandy, but that does not actually mean that end users and librarians are going to see your content. For that to work, librarians have to do a lot of work on their own to get things going. So this portion, the second half, is going to look primarily at a couple of questions librarians deal with when addressing platform migrations, and then we're going to end the session with an interactive portion of small groups where you all can help us problem solve some things that librarians bring up. So to launch into that, I'd like to do some introductions first, and as you might notice from the screen, there are some common names. I do apologize, but if you say Kristen or some form thereof, we will respond to you. So to get us started, I'd like to introduce first here on my left, your right, the city's own Kristen Martin. Kristen Martin works at the University of Chicago Libraries, and the official title with that is she's Director of Technical Services there. She has 18 years experience working in libraries and does a great deal overseeing acquisitions for e-resources as well as access and accessibility. Then next over in the lovely salmon sweater is Angela Sidman from Yale University Libraries. And Angela is the Director of E-Resources and Serials Management there. She's also extremely passionate about how platform migrations occur. So you may have actually heard her speak about this topic before, and I know she has some great insights to share. Her department deals with the full lifestyle of content from acquisition to, again, access, doing troubleshooting. So she has a lot of experience with platform migrations as well. And then our third participant in this librarian section is the ever wonderful Christine and Chicago, Christine Stamson. And Christine is the director of NERL, so the Northeast Research Libraries Consortium, which I'm sure you've all had to work with at one time or another. Bless them. And she, again, helps a bunch of libraries, I believe it's 140 over 140 libraries come to terms with publishers so that everyone gets the type of e-resources that they need. And I'm Kristen Twardowski. I know I had a brief introduction from Allison before. I work for Duke University Press in the Library Relations Department. Technically, I'm the, the new title is Library Sales Coordinator. For the purposes of platform migration, I dealt with communications with librarians, interacting with discovery services and link resolvers, as well as just handling some easy proxy and other quirks. I was also on that team that was doing the account consolidation. So if you ever want to talk about IP stuff, I am super excited to do it. And I believe that's going to launch us into the first portion of this librarian session. So like I said, we're going to start off with a facilitated question and answer. I'm going to pose a few questions. Our lovely panel is going to answer them. So first off, very simply, we know what kind of migrations we as publishers deal with. What does migration mean to a librarian? What types of platform migrations do they deal with? What comes to mind? And I think, Kristen Martin, I'd love for you to get us started.
Okay, so we're just going to pass the mic around because we're going back and forth, and I believe there's a clicker here, so I have two computers going at once, so hopefully I will move them simultaneously. So we kind of have a different experience with platform migrations, whereas we saw that extremely complicated wheel of activity. For us on the library side, these are things that sort of happen to us all the time, but that we don't have that same level of control or perhaps illusion of control that publishers have. So I'm kind of categorizing these and how, when they come to the library, we put them in some different buckets. And I provided some examples of different platform migrations that have happened in the last year as to be illustrative and not to single out anybody as being particularly good or bad. So the commonest type of platform migration is where you have a single content type that's moving from one platform to a new platform. So you've got content A from publisher A on platform A. Content A and publisher A don't change, or they shouldn't anyway, and they move to platform B. So this is very common with the types of journal subscriptions, and I think it fits sort of, the APS journals moving over, or some of the Duke University Press titles moving over. This is something where we in libraries can create a checklist to kind of see did things go the way we expected them to. The areas where we oftentimes are following up are with access verification and just making sure that indeed everything worked for us as the customer. So a much more complicated case is a merger where you might have two or more platforms. Maybe these are things that got bought up by a larger publisher, and then things are getting combined and merged from two platforms to one. So the example here is the eBook Central platform, which was a really significant undertaking by ProQuest, where they took content from eBrary that had been originally, eBrary was its own company. They took content from EBL, which originally was on its own platform, its own company. That content got merged together, became ProQuest, and became the ProQuest eBook Central platform. So here you've got the sunset of multiple platforms. You have the merger of formerly separate content, and there may be a lot of extra communication and lead time in here. And this is something where I think the publisher and the libraries need to work together over a longer period of time for beta testing, maybe URL changes, and making sure that there is at least a minimization of the loss of content over time. So another example of platform migration that I feel like sometimes gets overlooked from the publisher perspective, but gets very important from a library perspective, is when content is acquired and then merged into an existing platform. So this isn't like a wholesale migration, but you might have content from one provider, like in this case, Palgrave, the New Statesman, and the dictionary of the Palgrave New Dictionary of Economics. They had their own platform. Springer took them, merging them into SpringerLink, which is an existing platform, already has functionality built in. And so here, the thing that librarians tend to be most concerned about is what is the functionality between these platforms, because sometimes these more boutique specialized resources, they get bought up by a larger publisher, they go onto a platform that is perhaps very effective for STM publishers and for dishing out journal content, but maybe is losing some of that boutiqueness that was on the old platform. And communication here sometimes is not also that well provided between the publisher and the library, because it isn't like a wholesale change. So the last type that I'd like to talk about here is a database that's migrating to a new platform. So here it's all about the features. In this example, this is where LexisNexis Academic migrated to Nexus Uni. So there's particular features on platform A, and then there's new features on platform B. And so what we end up focusing on is what are the features and how can we communicate that with the specific stakeholders and the power users that are going to be most concerned about these functionality changes. So when I'm using the term ERM, I realize that's a little jargony. I'm talking about electronic resources management staff and the type of work that's happening in electronic resources management in the library. So we're going to be looking specifically about the customization and the branding that tends to be stronger on these database platforms than on journal platforms. And here's where some dual platform and beta testing is particularly helpful. We know in the library that it's hard to keep all of our users happy. If we ever provide a service, there is someone somewhere who uses it and loves it. Even if everybody else thinks it's awful, there is going to be at least one person who's going to find it really hard to give up some of those things. So there will be someone somewhere who's disgruntled. And here's where the dual platforms can be really helpful, because they'll give the users a chance to understand the new platform, to know the types of things that they might actually be losing, but also to know, like, what are the gains or how can I continue to do my research even if it's in a slightly different way. And on top of these types of migrations that are happening, we also might have our own sort of giant content migrations of like our integrated library system, which really looks a lot more like the structure that you saw from publishers. We also have other vendors that we work with for non-content providers, and those things may pull some of the electronic resources management staff in other directions, because the electronic resources management side of things tends to be the experts on branding and collecting usage data. So our time gets pulled in many different directions, even though we don't have a lot of control.
All right, and yeah, Christine, would you mind?
Okay, sure. Okay. Well, no matter what kind of migration it is, really it's my job as the director of a consortium to advocate for my members. At NERL, we don't host any materials, any contents. There are other consortia that do, and they might have more problems. In the past couple of years, what I found is this platform migration has become the new norm, and it was interesting this morning when people raised their hands as to how many publishers migrated, and there were quite a few hands up. And it's not just the big publishers, but it's lots of small and medium-sized publishers as well that are doing these types of migration. And we work with over 100 publishers of all sizes, ranging from very small to mega publishers, and 140 libraries. So it's my job to work efficiently and smartly in order to get all this information across to my users. And at the end of the day, I'm really an advocate for my members. And I think later in the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some more definite ways that we work with the publishers to try to get all this information across to the libraries.
All right, and Angela, was there anything you wanted or no? Okay, fabulous. In that case, that's going to bring us to our second question, which is looking at what does a platform look like functionally, technically from a library perspective? So Kristen showed these are the migration types we deal with. Now, what do librarians have to do to actually integrate those migrations into their already existing systems? So Angela, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. So, like all the best things that happen to you at work, this kicks off with someone getting an email. and that email could literally go to almost anyone and could say almost anything. The sheer variety in this initial piece of communication is vast. Sometimes it's a direct message to technical contacts who are managing these platforms. Sometimes it is a line in a marketing newsletter that we pretty much automatically delete, right? Sometimes a sharp-eared subject librarian over in economics gets wind that something's about to move. The important thing is that once we hear about it, we write it down, because as Kristen alluded to, we have a lot of things happening, and just some of those things are concentrating on platform migrations. And I looked before I left. We are currently, at my institution, have 6 migrations that we are waiting to have happen. 4 of them have been on our list for over 2 months, and we have a number that already migrated where we are still doing cleanup. And so for us, trying not to forget that this is happening, trying to remember what we know so that we are not going back to email and kind of looking things up every time this comes up. What this looks like, is we have a running box note that the staff who work on Access, when the email comes in, someone drops it in there. And our goal then is at our next team meeting, we look at it and talk about the information we received. Maybe there's a timeline or an FAQ that we can look at. And then we run it against an internal checklist. And this checklist is one that actually was developed at MIT. They use it, and that we borrowed and made match our circumstances. And it kind of codifies and formalizes some things that we were doing anyway, because in this initial, we found out this migration is happening moment, our 2 goals are to figure out how big a deal is this going to be, i.e. how much work, and is there anything we need to do now? And the how much work kind of gets at Kristen's point about the shape of these migrations, right? If it's a database moving platforms, we can understand that. If it's something where you've got content that used to live on multiple branded sites all moving to one central site for a publisher, it means we're probably going to want to download our entitlements and make sure that we have a clear sense of what used to live on each of those existing platforms, so that when we get to the other side, we can make sure all our stuff made it there too, right? And so that's the kind of work we do at the outset to figure out what we're going to need to do to manage this migration on our end. After that, we go into a period that often lasts for months, where we do nothing except circle back, right? We've got this, there is a lot of, and we've got plenty of other stuff happening. And so what it means is we go back to that document and we look at it and we're like, has anyone heard anything new about this? No? All right. It's not supposed to happen for another 2 months anyway. It says late summer 2018. It's only June, right? We'll hear about it soon enough, we hope, right? And so that's it. And we do that and kind of repeat and add new information, or just keep an eye on things for literally months sometimes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said download your entitlements.
Yeah.
Is our system your system of record of what your entitlements are?
Never.
Okay, good.
No, never, ever. But we do cross-checking. So what we don't want is sometimes we migrate and we end up in license disputes, because there are things that the publisher is using their entitlement system as though it is our licensing system, and we end up having to go back to the contracts and prove it. No, we tend to... what's nice is if we can export a report from the platform and then maybe do a search in our catalog and see if the numbers sort of match, and then look at our licenses and kind of cross-check ourselves so that we know what pieces, and this is particularly for things if we bought it perhaps by, if it's sold by subject and year. Oh, we bought economics 2013, 14, 15, and 17, skipped 16, who knows why, right? And it should be about this many titles, and we're expecting to see them on the other side.
So this is great, because I've always been like, why do they need to download that information from the platform?
We're doing VLOOKUPs.
Got it.
Yeah. So just on that point, one of the things that we are often doing in the library is title reconciliation. So inevitably, what we say we have access to and what we have access to do not match. And so then the question is, are we supposed to have access to this? Why are we supposed to have access to this? When did we buy it? Like, what happened? And so I think this comment came from, this comment came earlier, but you know, the mistakes that are on the old platform, like they'll still be there on the new platform, and there might be other mistakes. So the more that you can kind of make sure that at least the old platform accurately represents your content, the easier it's going to be to understand, like, oh, when you audit your content on the new platform, this is because of some sort of like migration, like customer, entitlement list error, versus you haven't had access to the content for 5 years and you just didn't realize it. So.
Yeah. So during that waiting period, one of the things that happens is once a date is announced, someone puts that date on their Outlook calendar, and when they come in that morning, they get a reminder, it's migration day. And so whoever that person is goes to your site and says, did we migrate? Did it happen? And chances are it happened. And then we go through a couple of steps. There's kind of a basic is this thing really, are we up? And we look, like, does it recognize us? Does it know where I am coming from? Is my branding there? Can I log into the admin side and see my IP ranges? Does it seem like I can run a basic search and get to some kind of content? And if that all works out, then we start doing more granular checks. And we tend to start with spot checking. We will spot check, so for journal content, go and spot check some front file and some back file. And if we find things that are missing, and we'll check for things outside as well, because most of our traffic originates elsewhere, right? We might like look at an exact title and search for it in Google Scholar and see if we can connect back in, right? So we start by spot checking, and then if we find things, start going really in depth. And so there are staff within the library who, if there is a major platform migration, can expect to spend hours each day, if there's a problem, getting to the source of what is missing on our end so that we can tell the publisher and also tell our constituents.
I'm going to jump in real quick and just say that to publishers, what this looks like is that on in those first hour of the first business day you've launched, as they're doing those rough cuts or those quick checks, whatever is wrong, you will hear from 100 of your customers in the next 2 hours.
Yeah, Duke had I don't know if you would call it an action team, but essentially we were all sitting by our computers the first day of the migration just waiting for tickets to come in about potential problems.
Well, and I would say, to follow up on a point that was made earlier, the best thing a publishing can do is confirm that you know that there's a problem, because we absolutely report these things and they say, no, that's just your institution. It's probably your network, right? The phrase, it's probably your network, wins you no love, because it is never our network. You just had a platform migration, right? Of course, the fact that something is missing is tied to that and not to our network, where literally everything else works.
Yeah, so the action team was reporting into me desperately. I was calling our vendor partner, and they were asking, well, what is their IP address? Well, what about this? And can they tell you exactly how they did that? It's like, no, there are 100 of them. They all have the same problem. There is a problem. So, this is a difficult path to walk, because the way your vendor wants to operate is, tell me how to recreate the problem so that we can verify there is a problem, diagnose it, and fix it. And you're like, I don't know. There are 100 people who can't do what they need to do, and they write us big checks every year. So, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting about this is that for us, the follow-up to a platform migration can last for months. And so, right, there's that initial burst where there is something that just doesn't work, right? There could be big chunks of content missing from the platform, or I would say even more devastatingly, links to the platform don't work, right? If you followed of our discovery services or our URL resolvers stop working, that's a huge problem. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of content passes through those systems a year, probably millions, right? If you drop out of those, you are disappearing yourselves, right? And we are going to hear about it, because just like you get a flood of 100 people whoever is running our troubleshooting staff is going to get a flood because there's nothing to confirm that people are using the content, like having the content break and having everybody start to write in. And so those are kind of the first things that happen. I will say we then spend sometimes a long period of time pursuing smaller, more niggly problems. Supplements on journal platforms can stay inaccessible sometimes for months. New starts and takeover titles can be among the disappeared. That there are things that are pre-publication is often a problem. That there are a lot of things that we spend a lot of time that our users are looking for, trying to link to, trying to find, and that is gone. That we spend a lot of time kind of reporting where it's smaller, but it's there. It's an ongoing current. To follow Kristen's point about complexity and her example from eBook Central, something that involves a MARC record reload can also stay on our list for months. We moved to eBook Central a long time ago. We are scheduled this summer to replace about 150,000 records in our catalog, and that is a platform where we also bought things in different ways. We've got subscription content, we have titles that we purchased individually, we have things that went through a weird demand-driven acquisition program in 2013, and recently my iLibrary titles turned up on there. So we'll just roll that in as well, but that's something we had to plan for, and we need IT. It's 150,000 records. Our server access isn't that good, and so there is outside help that is needed for us for that. And so it's a long tail. We spend months waiting for these things, and then there's kind of an initial spike in activity while we check, but there is a long ongoing tail often as we kind of settle in on our new homes.
Okay, so what can a consortium do to help for a smooth transition? As Angela pointed out, there's a lot that goes on at the library, but there's just two of us at NERL. So how can I be proactive and make sure that my libraries are getting the content that they've paid for? So what we've done, and this actually came from some wonderful librarians at Yale, because of a migration that did not go well, in which we were not given enough time to plan, because as you saw, there's lots of checklists to go through. We actually now have put into our license wording that we need to be notified of a platform change in X months, and we negotiate that with the publisher, because we do need the time to let our libraries know to plan for these migrations. Also, because people can lose access, it happens, we've also negotiated a service level agreement with many of our publishers where for urgent access, we ask for 24-hour turnaround time, and in those I put in the subject, urgent access issue, NERL, exclamation point, so they stand out. And those are the ones that, if someone's gotten a lot of emails from me, they should look at the one that says, urgent. And one thing that came out as we were discussing this is, one way that I can be proactive is I can put on my calendar the day the migration starts, and then I can communicate out to my members, are you having any issues? Because as we heard before, we've had people say, oh, it's just you. It's your problem, it's not ours. But once I get 50, 60 people emailing me that they've lost access, it's my job to go into gear and do my coordinated complaining. And normally I have a very good person that I work with in every publisher that I work with, and that we get along really well and have a great relationship. So many times I can get it worked on before anybody else.
So just, I'm going to be quick as we are trying to move through. I feel like what Angela's providing is sort of like the gold standard for how we want to support platform migrations. At Chicago, I confess we are not always that organized, so there's always a lot of things going on. Allison mentioned people are trying to schedule their vacations around the platform migrations. Well, sometimes the platform migrations happen when we're down staff members, or it's like, it happens to be finals week, like Chicago's on quarter, so our academic calendar always doesn't match others, and then they're like, oh, you're going to lose access to that content for a week, sorry. And I'm like, well, that's really not good timing. But, so we're end up getting stretched thin with, we have our cyclical acquisitions and the academic year workflows. We're not in control of these timelines, so sometimes we're just really winging it. So whatever we can do for lead time or to get some of these preparation in advance is really helpful.
All right, and I believe that brings us to our third and final question. So all of the librarians so far have alluded to things that can go wrong, but I want us to get a little more detailed into that. So what do you wish that publishers would do to make these platforms migrations go more smoothly for librarians? Are there specific things you can think of? And Christine, with your coordinated complaining, I think you would be wonderful to get us started
Well, thank you
off.
for asking. Yes. Okay. So just like in real estate, we say what's important: location, location, location. Here we say communication, communication, communication. And we've talked about this earlier. Reach out. If you have a customer advisory board, please use it. I know I came from a subscription, we have to pay subscription agent background, and I had my customer advisory board that gave me great feedback. Meet with your strategic customer base, and you all know who they are because they're loud. You know, okay? And end users, and I know that this gentleman said, well, sometimes we have to pay the end users. We sort of giggled up here because we do all this user testing and we don't get paid for it. But really, reach out to your users. And again, we alluded to this, Allison alluded to this. So with some platform upgrades, I'm looking for certain things in my licenses now. And if you remember anything from my presentation, the most important one is accessibility. I have, especially I will tell you right now, in Pennsylvania and New York, universities have to get waivers from general counsels for resources that don't have good accessibility. Sometimes VPATs are okay, but for the most part, conforming to WCAG 2.0 is the standard. So that's really very, very important. Text and data mining, that's been around for a long time, and again, something that researchers expect nowadays, especially with the millennials. They already do that. They know how to get to the content. They know how to text and data mine, whether you want them to or not. So best to give them a way to do that. Also, branding for institutions. This has been led right now by Columbia University. They want their branding prominent on everything that they pay for because they want to promote to their university that content is coming from Columbia University and not just from Google. And also, I was very happy to hear about all the archiving, the preservation, because that's, again, very, very important because libraries are spending thousands and millions of dollars for content. Some more advice. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't do two things at one time. I know a lot of you sent out FAQs in the beginning. Do this as far ahead as possible and keep that information coming. Not everyone reads everything that you send out on the first time, believe me. And make sure that the FAQs are up to date. Again, communicate updates on a regular schedule, and then let us know if you're still on track. That's really important as well. Are you still on track? Because as you know, libraries are tracking every step. So from my perspective, I make sure that I have a vehicle in place to notify my members of platform changes. I have a newsletter that goes out every couple of weeks. It's called Neural Notes. And I put all that information out there and I keep it in front of them for 2 to 3 months so they know about it. Sometimes some of the smaller publishers have emailed me and I've put that in, and customers have come back to me and said thank you very much because they never emailed me, the library, who has a subscription, so they've just emailed me. So I just try to make sure it goes out. My suggestion would be just bombard everybody. And then check in with your members, for me, after migration takes place. I always make sure that I have a service agreement in place. And also, I think that relationships are very important with my publisher. So I try to keep very good relationships with my publisher, and my motto is no surprises. I just don't want to hear any surprises. Next slide, please. So this is just a sample. ACLS had a platform migration, or they will be coming up on one, and they sent me something. I put it up in our newsletter with a little blurb, and I put a link in there, and it links to our database, which is password protected for my members, and I keep all that documentation on my platform under their agreement page. so they have it in front of them anytime they want. So no one else can see this, just my members can see this information. I think that's it for me.
All right, and Kristen, is this?
Yes, so I was thinking a little bit about how we in the library can partner with publishers to do some of this quality control in advance of migration when feasible. And these are some of our pain points, are kind of the post-launch entitlement errors. So if you have an advisory board, or you have particular customers that you could go to, we can audit our content, and we generally will happily do it for no charge on your part, because we want to make sure that it is working, and that's part of our job, and that's something that we take pride in, making sure that our users are going to have access to the content. I think this has helped raise understanding from my part on the library side about what you as the publisher can control, what the platform vendors provide, and so to a certain extent we have to advocate for our users to the publishers, who then are communicating with the platform providers about the types of things that we need in a platform. So it's a complicated dance. But we'd like to be able to rely on the interface sort of accurately indicating that the content's available without having to click and hit the paywall. So make sure like the little green box is correct. If there's functionality or features where you think something's really good and you'd like to get some power users to test out, we can probably find them. Especially for some of the more complicated cases. There's a bibliographer at the University of Chicago who's does literature in the Americas and Europe, and she is an excellent tester. We've had many WebEx with different vendors when content is migrating, where she can say, this is how I need to teach my students, this is the type of research that they're doing, and and it's been eye-opening, and it's much better if that eye-opening happens, say, before the old platform is gone. And I think that you'd be surprised at what people are doing on your platform, and these are legitimate use cases that can be helpful, and maybe you can't accommodate all of them, but it's good even to be able to know that we're getting on your roadmap. So I also feel like kind of as a last resort, if you need to, turn on all the content, but that's not like that's not actually something that we as libraries like that well. You might think like, great, it's all available, and now we can get whatever we didn't pay for, but then users are like, hey, all this stuff is available, and then it goes away, and then they're like, where did it go? And it just kind of drags out the process, and it makes that auditing pretty much impossible because everything is working. So it's better than nothing working, but it's not, preferred. So the last point that I would like to make before I turn it over to Angela is the linking. So Angela's alluded to this. If there's any way to have your links continue to work from one platform migration to another, that makes our life much easier. In more complicated cases, make sure we have a time frame so that there is some sort of a redirect process over time, like for example with the eBook Central. If there's a framework you can provide so we can sort of automate this process, we have some pretty ingenious people in our data management services department who can go in and make these kinds of changes. And if you can provide updated records, have the same match point, we can overlay them, or if you can use persistent URLs, like DOIs, I think are super helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because this was definitely one of our black boxes of, I had no idea how to redirect thousands and thousands and thousands of URLs. So a lot of that just rests on your platform partner knowing what to do and helping you understand how this works, so it's not such a black box. And then another kind of thing that tripped us up is not knowing exactly what the URL pattern was going to be. Like for a lot of platforms, you can say, if you know these 3 bibliographic metadata elements, the journal title, the volume, the issue, and the page number, that will construct a URL. Well, what we found out when we launched is each piece of our content had a unique proprietary ID in the platform's database. That makes it impossible to construct a predictable URL. It can be, there is a DOI lookup, but 6,000 of our articles didn't have their DOIs deposited, and we didn't know that. So these are just things that come up that you have, as a publisher, have so little understanding of how you fit into that library discovery ecosystem, which I think goes.
Yeah, so the last point I would like to make is to just underscore how crucial it is to build in time to work with library discovery vendors. That though libraries would like to think that discovery begins on our platforms, and you probably would like to believe that discovery begins on your platforms, none of that's true. Right? It starts in Google, it starts in PubMed, it starts all kinds of places, and that relies on all of our linking services working. And for us, I think that means probably two things: that our article discovery service, which is indexing things at the article level, that could be a Summon or a Primo or an EDS, or the kind of the major things that are in use at most academic libraries, that those, especially in cases where they are relying on direct, kind of deep direct linking, are updated if needed in sync with this migration, and that our link resolvers, right? So the open URL that takes something from a citation and takes you to full text, and it can do a lookup and tell you all the places you have full text available, or go right there, which that is what's running in Google Scholar, that's running in PubMed, that's running all of these places. If those don't work, that creates chaos. And I will say, certainly at my institution, people don't particularly care whose fault it is that it's not working. They're just so angry that it's not working. And also, we don't control any of those interfaces. If publishers haven't synced with our linking services, we don't have a good way to kind of, we send out an email to staff that are like, hey, this migrated, they haven't updated their links, they say it's going to hit in the next 2-week cycle. Until then, here's an alternative path to try to look up citations by hand and browse there, which is awful and also is only known to staff. It's not really something we want to put in red on the library website, right? And so the better you stay in sync with those, the better that kind of initial experience will be of people getting to your platform and using it in the way you intend.
So it's deeply depressing to me that you don't influence those, have control over those interfaces, because publishers don't have control over what Ex Libris does on what timeline. And so this is just an area that that neither of us seem to be able to exert a whole lot of influence on.
So we have influence. Certainly we can put in tickets. There's a content working group for Ex Libris that covers both Primo and Summon and the knowledge bases that run behind them. You can tell them something's important and that something is coming, right? And they can help promote that. The interfaces, I was talking about actually things external, like Google. We have no control over Google. You have no control over Google, right? If something doesn't work from Google, it's just annoying and the person's going to choose something else, right?
And I do want to talk just a little bit more about discovery services from the publisher side. So I was the discovery services link resolver liaison for UPress. And sometimes, no matter how far in advance you give people updated links or URLs, that doesn't necessarily mean they get updated when they should. And so we rely really heavily on librarians, like Angela said, putting in tickets. If we say, hey, we did actually send this to them 2 months ago, and then a month ago, and then 2 weeks ago, having librarians go in and complain is sometimes more beneficial than just having us go back and reiterate the same information. So having good library partners is so important to getting this process working on the publisher end. And I think, unless, is everyone good with that? All right, then I think we are going into the second half of the librarian exercise, which is, oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind the question. So I know it's on a smaller scale, but how much does it concern you as a librarian about major website redesigns? Like, does that have like a similar level like this where you really want to get involved so you understand what features changed and whatnot?
So I think it depends on what the resource is and what the feature set is that our users are relying on. That probably falls into sort of that database migration area, where if there's new search functionality and there's different ways that people are able to access the content, we kind of need to be aware of it. It may be less fraught with like entitlement issues. And I think, one thing that everybody needs to be aware of with websites is there's always compromises. So as we move towards responsive design and making sure that we're accessible, sometimes that means things really don't look as good on your desktop as they used to. It's the way that things are. So I think being aware of those things also, they can go onto our migration planning. And then we can just do a quick check.
One of the things that APS did, not only did we put out an FAQ for our librarians and talk about, what new features they can expect on our platform and, things that they could pass along to their clients, we also put together an instructional video on how to use the new features, and that was really popular. Another thing for publishers to think about is, putting something out there like that for your users.
Cody.
What's the best way to communicate with librarians?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? What's the best case? And in a minute, I'm going to let them suggest what they think the best case is. I'm also going to tell you what Duke did. So what we did is we exported every single email address that we possibly could have about all of our customers and sent them email after email after email. They didn't hate us, I think, so that seems to work fairly well. But posting to listservs as well, making sure you're in contact with agents and consortia and essentially every partner you work with. That's how we did it. But how do you prefer to be communicated with?
Well, as a consortium director, it's if you communicate to me, I can communicate out to lots of people. I hope I'm not misspeaking. I bet you librarians would probably read my emails before they read some of your emails. Yeah, I think because of my newsletter, it comes out every couple of weeks. They know that there's salient information in it, so.
Yeah, I would say more sources is better. That most of us in our contracts have technical contact information that's in our license agreements, or in our admin portals have an email address that goes to our whoever is in charge of technical support. That person should hear. I would say the bombardment method, it means that everybody knows. It also means whoever is actually in charge of that at that institution receives, let's call it 15 forwards the minute it comes out. People are like, FYI, in case you didn't get this. And you're like, but sometimes you didn't get it. And so it's better safe than sorry. Yeah, but there should be a technical contact who should hear.
Yeah, I think that trying to work through consortia is a really great way, because if I get I'm part of the BTAA. If I get an email from the BTAA, I will read it. Whereas, I'm getting maybe 200 email messages a day. And so if 100 of those are from different content providers, I don't read them. I just can't. It's too much. And so things can get missed that way. But I think the other, option, if you're doing something major and you have sales representatives, if I'm getting an email from my sales representative versus like what's new at such and such publisher, I'm not going to read what's new at such and such publisher because I'm like, I don't have any money right now to spend, so I'm not interested. But if Joe Smith contacts me and says, hey, how you doing? I want to let you know we're going to be doing this migration. You might not have seen this, but here's a link. Like, that can also be really helpful, just that personal touch to sort of elevate it above like the everything else.
What about a clear subject line? Platform migration. Not what's new. That just occurred to me. One other thing we did, and I don't know how applicable this is to everybody in the room, but we go to many library conferences, and we heavily featured the migration and migration information at the booth, so as we interacted with our customers coming by, they could ask about it, or we could tell them about it and make sure they knew about it.
Yeah, one of the things, so I attend a lot of the domestic library conferences, and one of the things we had was a little postcard that said, here's our platform migration information URL, go to it, and I would just stuff it in librarians' hands and say, please give this to your technical services librarian. I like to think they did. They seemed receptive, but it was just another way to get that information out there.
Just a real quick, do you want to make a quick programming note?
Sure. Just so everyone is aware, we were going to have the librarian workshop, but for time and because we think it's more productive to answer some of the questions you all have, we're going to dive into the Q&A session. We may jump back to answer some of the broader topics later.
And we may take some of the questions that were in the workshop and pose them back to you.
I was curious how valuable a library site is for librarians, specifically geared towards librarians.
Yeah, so we absolutely appreciate those and look at those. I would say the tripping point, and this came up in someone's slides, is if you write them before the migration and then never update them, right? So what the problem is stale information. If your migration slips and it was going to happen in June and now it's happening in September when classes start, which happens so often, right? And is a big problem, right? We need to see that. If there's a known problem, if there's something, if those could be kind of living documents as opposed to something optimistic, that's right, everything at the outset, because everything looks great 4 months in advance. But those really, they line up well with our internal checklists, and they really help us assess what is the impact. So we really like them, but we like them more if they stay current.
We had a page on our website, and we prominently at the top of it featured last updated. So we kept, just some rough sense for any librarian who came by, like, oh, this has changed since I last looked. It's worth me reading.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to say about our tracking of that site is people tended not to click in through the links on that library migration page, but they did appear just from the heat map to be looking at that top updated part, so.
Just want to say one thing. Sometimes I'll go to sites and it just gives me an email, if there's an issue, blah, 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 email. Truthfully, I want a phone number. I'm the kind of person I just want to pick up the phone and I want to talk to someone. I don't want to have to write out a lengthy email. I just want to talk to somebody, so.
And while you're all percolating then on other questions you might want to ask us, one thing I'm curious to hear about is librarians have mentioned a bunch of pain points. Are there ones that you either hadn't heard of before or you have a good, easy solution for resolving them? Because I know they would be excited to hear that.
Or that strike you as good ideas, but you can sense some complexity that might prevent it. Well, I've got one. So when it comes to content platforms specifically, not database, but where, journal or book content is moving from one place to another, we talked about whether we could do a dual platform run, and we didn't see any technical way possible. And so I'm curious as to whether you've had a publisher platform migration where you had dual platforms, before I dive into mentioning what the complexities seem to be.
Absolutely we have. And they are appreciated. Yeah, because it means there's I would say, a feeling that sometimes these things launch and there is so much wrong. Content is missing. We've had things launch where the search only brings back results from the last 5 years. That's not something we should be the ones that are finding when it's live. And so having dual access gives you this way to kind of have it be a soft launch, right? It can be more of a beta, and it gives people the ability to interact, to send usability feedback. We've had things where there are giant login buttons for things that we subscribe to that had to be removed because they were so deeply misleading, right? The access provided by Yale University Library was little tiny up in a corner and a giant login button asking for all this other information on the side when you already have access. That things like that if we can just look at that early, because there's absolutely an understanding that this is a big lift, right? And that it won't be perfect at point of migration, but there are things that if we could get them out of the way before this ever moved into public sphere.
So wait, is that so I think what I'm thinking of is the dual platform post-launch?
Oh,
Because-
post-launch. So we have done it both ways. We've had dual post-launch, and we have had beta access pre-launch.
Okay, because. Yeah, so how do
So it
we
has a
how do we
totally different-
redirect our URLs?
It's not redirecting.
How
It's
do we
just
update our CrossRef? How do we update your link resolvers to the new
So
place?
it is more usability. So who Index of Medieval Art just did a beta. Project Muse is in a beta right now, and they've got journals and ebooks.
Are they in your discovery system?
Probably not for the beta.
And it's not their system, but their production system, their system of production.
Yeah, I think you are correct. There are limitations. Yeah, but generally the way I've seen this happen is the old system stays predominant. But the new platform with the content becomes available. However, from the discovery area, it continues to link to the old system, but it gives us in the library a chance to audit the content to see if it migrated over, to talk to some power users. What it doesn't do is, like, if it turns out like every link from SFX is just going to break when you migrate over because there's parsing errors or something. That is hard. That's a challenge. One of the things that has also been helpful is, so let's say you make that flip, because you're right, that is it's like a switch. It's like on or off. It's not like a dimmer, right?
It's not like, hey, this deal, I can go here and here.
But if the old site remains available, at least then, you're like, okay, well, something just horrible happened on the new site, but people can still at least access content on the old site. That's
Not
been
if
the
I
case
set my
too.
URLs up to redirect once it goes live. I don't mean to put like a technical challenge down. I
No,
just
I'm
think
trying
these
to
are
think
points that
about
are really interesting because it makes so much sense. And especially if we talk about it as a usability testing period that is actually prior to the hard launch. But, where not everything, things that weren't right when we launched, so much of them were around that access and discovery system that running a dual platform would not have revealed. So I think it's interesting for me to understand, and maybe for others, that if the goal is getting familiar with the interface and giving some key usability insights, then we can plan and maybe do that prior to actual hard launch. But I'm still not clear on how to manage true dual platform access while also having all systems be go. Yeah.
So the thing I can think about, and this is, it's not the same. It's not journal and ebook content. We had dual access on LexisNexis and Nexus Uni, and we set them both up in our discovery services.
I noticed that, and I wondered.
And it ran in parallel, and then we had a period where people were looking at it, and so we dropped an intermediate page in. If you started from the library website, it would say, LexisNexis Academic is going away, it's becoming Nexus Uni, click here to go to the new site, click here to go to the classic LexisNexis Academic. And so we did it that way, and it's on someone's Outlook calendar that on June 4th, the old version is getting removed, that note is getting removed, and we're shutting everything. It's probably off now, more or less. But it meant all those links and things were up beforehand, and that we don't have journal records in our catalog for that, right? That there is less complexity around redirects. It was something that in our back-end system we could turn on. It was a catalog record we could add, and so it was much simpler to run two at once.
And just real quick on dual platforms, I was told this, I didn't have a chance to verify, but I was told that Google Scholar also penalizes you if your content is in multiple places. I don't know exactly how that works or how long your content being in different places might, but it's just a rumor. Since we couldn't do we didn't know how to do a dual platform launch anyway, we said, great, another good reason not to do it.
And just because you brought up Google Scholar, just a comment about indexing. When you are making your
Limit, I guess you'd say, your emergency cutoff for, oh, this is someone is spamming or downloading content, etc. Make sure that if you can get your Google Scholar in a proxy or where it says, yes, it's okay that Google Scholar indexes all of our content, we would like them to click all of the pages because otherwise they may get temporarily locked out. So making sure your indexers have access is really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This kind of swerves more into the publisher lessons learned piece, but that spike in traffic you might see is going to be from every service trying to re-index every piece of content on your site. Google Scholar has it on their calendar. They're going there. You're probably also being re-indexed by all the general web services. The discovery services may be indexing your website. Vendors that you have, like Deep Dive, these third-party vendors who keep metadata records of all your stuff, are re-indexing your site. So all of that, I guess we just didn't have visibility to it before. This was one of our blind spots. So figuring out how to get them corralled into whitelisted IP addresses and get them following good rules for the rate that they were indexing the site, that's been a little bit of a surprise process that we had to follow. Carrie, did you run into any of that?
And we're still discovering things. Just recently, I like to use the Wayback Machine to go back to our old site to see what it looked like, and I noticed that our site had not been crawled since we launched, and I'm like, ooh, Wayback Machine must be not be whitelisted, so they can't crawl it. So it's just an example of things you're not thinking about. That sites you want to go in and crawl, but they can't, and you don't know it.
Or folks who come to crawl you and you don't know who they are or why they're crawling you.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for the. Oh, sorry. Were you gonna?
Well, I was going to add. I had an interesting experience with a publisher recently that was really helpful for us. Although, admittedly, I think takes a lot of effort on the publisher part, where they did a discovery audit of their resources in our discovery system, and so basically, this publisher went to check our catalog. Was there content in our catalog? They went to our discovery service, which at Chicago is EDS. Were the links showing up correctly in EDS? If they were trying to use our open URL resolver, which was SFX, was it accurate in there? Was it proxying correctly? They went into Google Scholar. They discovered something about Google Scholar that I'd never ever seen before. They were like, what's this other University of Chicago in this drop-down list here? And that's not your link resolver. And I was like, how did you even get to that page? And so, I asked this person, and this is actually a service that this publisher is doing for its customers. And just coincidentally, the BTAA is having a conference right now on discovery. So the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Oh, okay. And so they are doing a presentation looking at the libraries across. So the BTAA is basically the Big Ten Academic Alliance. What else can I say about it? The University of Chicago happens to be in it because at one point in time we were in the Big Ten many years ago. And so they went across all of these major libraries and looked and did this audit. But it discovered several mistakes on our part where we didn't have the proxy turned on in SFX. So those links weren't proxying. That meant they wouldn't work for people that were coming in off campus, and we didn't even realize that. They discovered this strange situation where we had ProQuest registered with Google Scholar. Don't even know how that happened. So we've been able to contact them to try to get that removed. And from this might be something to think about sort of as a post-launch, did all these things work out? And maybe you can't audit every customer, but if you have some customers that you could sit down and kind of look at everything, because if there's a problem with one customer, there could be problems with other customers. And, it's useful for us in the sense that we pay a lot of money for this resource. The the publisher wants us to continue subscribing to it. They want to see the usage numbers be robust. We want our usage numbers to be robust. So we're all kind of on the same page here to make sure that the content is integrated within, this actually pretty complex discovery environment.
And another aspect of working, making sure you and your content are playing nicely with the discovery service is not just all your back content that's migrating, but making sure that there is a method for getting new material that's going up on your platform. So if your platform is the focal point from which all of your content goes out to anywhere it needs to go, whether that's into aggregations you might participate in, or to these discovery services, because just giving them your files is the easiest way to make sure they get your metadata. You want to think about that with your platform too. And I think one of the things the librarians and the publishers agreed on as we were putting this together is that the whole discovery ecosystem that operates between us is a huge, I think it's way understood by publishers. They're not our vendors. We don't deal with them. Our systems don't run on them. They're not particularly responsive to us. They don't particularly understand anything about content or publishing other than the pieces of metadata that they index. So it can be really hard to have conversations with them. And I think this is a big area I know it's a big area for growth at Duke. I won't speak for any other publishers. And at least based on my somewhat narrow experience through the RFP process, it's a big opportunity. It's a big area for platforms to be looking at in terms of supporting publishers to bring with it, baked into the platform, these connectors into the discovery systems, as opposed to them being for each publisher a setup for each one of these, because they're constantly getting bought and merging and changing names, and it needs to be like PubMed Central and CrossRef deposits are. That's my pitch. My other hobby horse.
Before I ask the librarians a question, I know we've all been talking a lot. Has any of this brought up anything other folks want to ask?
Just for your experience as the publishers, how much help did you get from your service providers on being made aware of some of those gotchas that you were finding? Like, were you getting any help from them on some of them based on their experience as well, or was it mainly just stuff you were finding?
So I'll start and then bring the microphone over to Carrie. I think that most of the gotchas had to do with our stuff that our platform vendor wouldn't know. Also, what's dangerous about the blind spots is that they're blind spots, and you have them, but your platform vendor has them also. So you're assuming that their platform works like the other platform you're most familiar with in any given instance, and they're assuming that you as a publisher work like their other clients. And so the advice was know your blind spots to publishers. It would be great if the platform vendors were also cataloging their blind spots and their differences, because the way these things scale efficiently is to fit everybody into a box. But as Craig mentioned, there were a lot of differences that it was valuable to highlight. Now, I wasn't even able to highlight all of them, but at least the ones I knew about that I was able to highlight were helpful. But it would be good, again, I can't speak to Carrie's experience. I would have loved there to be a little bit more of a view about where I should be concerned, where we were different, that I didn't know we were different.
As I mentioned earlier, Google Scholar was the best at helping me discover some blind spots in that area. Darcy, right up front through the whole migration, was like, be sure to check this, be sure, this happens on your site, be sure you do this. The other sort of blind spots were discovered by me asking questions. It wasn't necessarily the vendors coming to me. So be sure you ask your questions. Why isn't this working the way we thought it would, or, and that's where you might get your spreadsheet back of 6,000 things that aren't working, which you didn't know about unless you asked. So ask questions.
Yeah, I know one of the things we did, especially for discovery services and link resolvers, was say, hey, so we're migrating soon. What do you need? Because at least in our department, we had no idea. We didn't exactly know the format of the metadata that they wanted or anything like that. And in some cases, we weren't able to supply it, but it was good to have that base of here is the optimal solution and what this all looks like.
And that query, what do you need, is more complex than it seems. So we made that query to some of our downstream data and content and metadata recipients, and the answer back was, just give us what you've been giving us. Well, I can't give you what we've been giving you. That came off of a whole nother platform. What are you expecting? Oh, I don't know, just give us what you... They don't know. You don't know. It's ridiculous, frankly. It's not documented. And again, this was, the last platform put together some kind of output, some kind of metadata file, dropped it off on an FTP site. Everybody went to get it. This is the first time we ever did it 15 years ago. So they programmed everything to that. We asked them, what are you going to need so that we could assess the gap? They couldn't tell us. Then when they started getting it, they said, oh, no, we need it in this other way, which was this completely hacked together way that was only relevant to the previous platform. All of this, if you assume that somebody should have something documented, it is not. It's not documented. Nobody knows it. We've all been doing this for 20, 25 years now, and nobody has it written down. If you do, more power to you. I have a question that I want to ask the audience and then ask the librarians. Okay, so I really want you to respond to this. If I say, I can't access something, what does that mean to you publishers? What does that look like? What do you assume is happening? And what do you assume my user experience is if I call and say, I don't have access to this? 404?
Well, yeah, it's difficult. We get a lot of those kind of emails like, I have this issue, I cannot access the article. Immediately, we need to follow up with more questions. Which article was it? What browser are you using? Was it just that article or also other articles? What country are you in? Can we reproduce it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just saying I can't have access. Yeah. We usually can't do anything with just that.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Oh, wait, sorry. I shouldn't have said go ahead.
We get a lot of, I hit the paywall, I should have access to this, and they don't. They think that, we had a member the other day call in and said, I know I have access to this, I updated my membership. Well, he was getting it through his company, and they didn't have access to what he expected them to have access to. So.
Anyone else want to share what you assume I don't have access means?
And sometimes there are ones that you just can't figure out. We had a guy contact us just last week who said, I was on my campus, I couldn't get in, his IP address is all checked out, but then he said, I went home and I got in through my university. And I had no idea what that meant. Why it worked in one place and it didn't work in the other, and our platform couldn't tell us, and we couldn't get any more information out of him. He said, it's solved now. I've got in, so.
So librarians, what do you mean when you say we don't have access to this? What are some of the user experiences you're having that cause you to say those words to us?
So first, before we go to you, we also are like, what does that mean? Because platforms are designed to monetize, it is confusing to users to know what they are supposed to have access to and not. It is not an obvious thing. It's not like the user goes to the platform and they only see what they should see. So frequently the information that we have, we are not telling users they should have access to something, and they're hitting a paywall because we never purchased that content in any way, shape, or form. But it's not clear. Like once they're on the platform, they don't know, I can't access something before 1997 on this journal, but on this journal you have the full back files. What's up with that? And that's because we never bought it. But, you know, I feel like this is a problem maybe with the ecosystem of how these things are provided, because there is this tension between, okay, your institution's buying this for you, and so we want to make it, you know, easy to tell, but hey, maybe you want to buy this article for $40 anyway, you know? So that's kind of like problem number one. Problem number two might be like, we just told them we had access, but actually we don't. So we do try to look that up, like, hey, are we supposed to have access to that? We say we should have access to the back files, but actually that's because SFX updated everything and they went back to like volume 1, but we never bought the back files for that title. Or we canceled that subscription, but we forgot to turn it off in this one place. So before we come to you, there's a whole process that we go through, and then it's like, okay, it looks like we should be subscribed to this, it looks like we should have access. Then we're going to come to ask the publisher and say, hey, from what we can tell, you know, we are able to reproduce what the user told us, which is, I went to go access an article, I wasn't allowed to download it, I'm on campus, I know the IP is registered, so it looks, you know, like that's where we're kind of starting when we come to the publisher.
So let me just share some of the examples of what we don't have access has meant through our migration. It was mind-blowing to me all the ways that that phrase, all the forms that phrase could take. So the most common is we don't have access. I went to the issue TOC and I see the article list and there's a lock, you know, whatever, a red cross or a lock by all of them. I don't have access. And then we figure out that they didn't try to download anything. They didn't try to click through to the article and see if the content is back there. They made the reasonable assumption that they should be able to trust those icons. But those are entirely separated technology. I mean, they're not entirely separated. They have to be connected to work. But that can be a bug. The access icon itself can be a bug, separate from whether you have access or not. So there was that. There was that a lot of our content is PDF only. So they were expecting to see the full text of an article in HTML, and they didn't, and they thought that that was the paywall. Again, not trying to download the PDF. The opposite of that was they only cared about downloading the PDF. They had the full text, but this was an instance where our PDF asset was missing. All of these tell us something. Oh, we have a bug in the access icons. Oh, we have missing content. Oh, we have a usability issue. So they're all good. But to you, they're just like, my people can't get what they need. And so, like, and I've had this experience going back through our customer relations saying, we need more information. They're saying, I don't want to ask them for more information. I don't want to bug them. But because of all these like tiny little nuances of what that person exactly was doing, it can mean that that lack of access has 6 different explanations, none of which have to do with, is that thing on your entitlements? Carrie?
Yeah, one of the things that we discovered, access issues, and it was perplexing to us at first. We were getting all these customers saying that they couldn't get access to our content, and they had a subscription. And, you know, in our records, it says their subscription was active, and we could not figure out why they weren't getting access. Well, it turns out all of these clients who didn't have access had renewed their subscription to 2018. Well, in that system, the 2018 subscription was overriding the 2017 subscription, so it looked like they didn't have access until 2018. So that was just one of the things that we had to fix, was, you know, allow for both subscriptions at once.
And that goes back to that, do a deep dive on everything having to do with access and data to prevent these kinds of things, because you don't know how your new platform handles it exactly in all of those nuances.
I would just jump in and say, if there's a second, that I feel like the list of examples that Kristen gave of people reporting access errors gives kind of justification to the argument that there should be some kind of beta testing period, because why should anyone know that those icons are wrong, right? And I think anytime you hear from a librarian. I think it's accepted within my institution that we hear the tiniest percentage of problem reports, and that most people just move on and do something else. And so that every problem report from one of us, you should count as dozens of people who had a bad experience and left. And so things like that never need to make it. I mean, they do. Things happen, right? But that is exactly the kind of problem, or right, having prominent screens that say log on, or having prominent things that make it look like you need to purchase something where people are just going to leave, and that's not what any of us want, and that is exactly the kind of thing you can catch in an earlier testing period.
If you can figure out the technical problems, because again, a lot of our we don't have access were discovery services that hadn't updated their links. And so the librarian did have access if they used the direct URL, but the URL that was being used was prefixed by the discovery service. And
for the usability problems,
for the usability problems,
right?
definitely,
because those are under your control.
Yeah, I agree.
Just a comment. Can I just make one comment? You had mentioned, like, I don't want to, bother them with a question. Bother us with the question, please do. I mean,
take that back. Take that back to customer relations.
Yes.
I definitely will take that back, and I also wanted to throw out that that's one of the reasons that having a phone number on the site can be so helpful, because it is so much quicker for your customer relations department to troubleshoot with someone on the phone than have 20 emails going back and forth, which could be an utter nightmare. But on that happy note of an utter nightmare, I think we're at time, and I think one of the takeaways from this is that platform migration does not have to be an utter nightmare, either for publishers or librarians. It's just working to troubleshoot some of these things and think a little bit in advance. But did you have any?
I just wanted to thank everybody who came and shared your perspectives. Really appreciate it. Here are our lovely librarians' email addresses. If you didn't get mine and Carrie's, we'll stay up here for a little while. Ask your fellow publishers what their experience has been. Let's start building that database of best practices and pitfalls. Thank you, everyone.